Welcome everyone to the Road Thoughts podcast, and today's guest is Professor Eric Donald. Professor Donald is an economist at the University of Pittsburgh. His work connects cities, housing, and labor markets to real-life decisions people make every day. In this conversation, we'll break down the hidden forces shaping where jobs go, why neighborhoods change, and what policy gets wrong when it ignores geography. If you ever wondered why your city is getting too expensive to live in and harder to live in at the same time, this episode's for you. Welcome, Professor Donald, to Rogue Thoughts.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here. You're one of the work you do is in spatial economics.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind explaining to the people what spatial economics is? Because that's not something anyone ever hears about.
Yeah, so economics really is a science of decision making, how people do or should make decisions. And many of our decisions have a spatial component. So when you decide where you're going to live, where you're going to take a job, when firms decide where they're going to locate their plants and so on, these are all spatial decisions. And so the location choice component is part of your optimization problem. And so, spatial economists want to take this seriously and want to think about how this location choice component of decision making affects economic outcomes.
How important is that to their decision making?
Well, it depends on what you're studying. But a lot of the recent changes in, for instance, the US economy in the last several decades have had a substantial spatial component. So, like, we've seen rising wage inequality is in large part highly visible when you look across space. So, there's been a growing difference in wages between higher density commuting zones. So, like locations, commuting zones is a thing an entity people often use in spatial economics. But there's been a large increase in the wage differences between low density locations and high density locations. So it depends a lot on what you're studying. But I mean, innovation is highly spatially concentrated. Climate damages are going to be highly spatially dispersed. A lot of things are vary a lot across space. And so space and moving have an important.
You mentioned climate and innovation. How do those two specifically affect spatial economics?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some work on climate innovation, not in the spatial context. And so I'd be happy to talk about that. But I mean, a lot of climate technologies now are space specific. So, for instance, our sort of best or one of our quickly improving energy technologies that doesn't involve emitting carbon is wind and solar. And solar capacity and wind capacity vary a lot across space. So, for instance, if we're going to shift a large portion of our electricity production to renewables, it's going to matter that the solar panels are put in sunny places, the windmills are put in windy places, and then that electricity can get transported to where people and economic activity is.
Do you see that happening in the near future?
Um, so I'll give you a reason to be optimistic about it, and I'll give you a reason to be less optimistic about it. The optimistic reason is that solar panels have been getting shockingly cheap, relatively, like very quickly, like Moore's law speed of change. So for those who don't know, Moore's law says that the number of transistors on a chip doubles every, I think, 2 years. And so it's an exponential process and like a very fast, very few things grow that quickly. And this is why we can do so much with computers now, is because we've gotten so good at stuffing transistors onto computer chips. Well, if you plot the price of solar production going back to when solar panels were invented in the 1950s, it has declined almost perfectly log linearly. So it's been exponential ever since. And it's even in the last 10 years, the price of solar panels is reduced by 90%. And there's really no sign of that slowing down. I mean, presumably it'll slow down someday, but a couple more decades of that, and solar will be the cheapest form of energy in the world. It already is cheaper than most other sources of energy in a lot of places. The thing that would cause me to be pessimistic about that is A, its intermittency, and B, its geographic variability. And to deal with the geographic variability, you need to build a lot of transmission lines. And we're not very good at doing things like building transmission lines. So I worry that that will be the part that where we bottleneck and are unable to take full advantage of cheap and abundant solar as a result.
How big are those transition lines?
I mean, so I couldn't tell you like an exact number, but they're the sort of transmission lines that you see like on highways driving.
Okay.
Um, and in general, it's just there's a lot of friction in the U.S. Infrastructure building space. If you want to make transmission lines, you're going to have to cross someone's property, and that's going to give them some veto power, right? And then you're going to cross someone else's property, and that's going to give them some veto power, and someone's going to complain somewhere. And this is, for instance, why California had so much trouble and is still having trouble building high-speed rail. Is there's just a huge number of people who come up with some reason to complain, some of which is legitimate, some of which is not, and they exercise a lot of veto power, and it makes it hard to build this large-scale infrastructure across space.
How much does policy affect the intricacies of getting things like this done? I mean, does it make it extremely hard? Does it make it moderately hard, or is it just there's no balance, or it varies?
Well, it varies, but policy determines how much veto power a given actor can have. So, like, we, in around the 1970s, I couldn't tell the exact date, but we put in place a lot of environmental laws, which says that if you want to build something, you have to do environmental reviews. And, we did this for largely good and benign reasons, and like the environment in many ways has cleaned up since the 1970s. And so I'm not saying that these were like stupid laws that never should have been passed, but they do give people the power to veto building new projects. So when you build something like high-speed rail or you build transmission lines, you have to do these environmental reviews, and that gives people who, for whatever reason, do not want these things built because it ruins their view or what have you, or better reasons. They can have good reasons, they can have bad reasons. They now have a lever by which to pull and slow down your project. And so that raises the cost of doing these things.
What would you change about that? Would you give them less veto power, or their veto power needs to be more legitimate if they want to use it?
I mean, I would, on the margin, certainly give them less veto power. I think in our current equilibrium, we give NIMBYs, which I'm sure is a word you've heard, too much veto power. Now, where exactly the right amount is, I don't know. There are dangers on the other side too, right? China's very good at building things, but this is because they just bulldoze people, and they're not allowed to complain. And that comes with some benefits, but it also comes with some costs that I think we would not be happy about bearing. And so I don't know what exactly the right mix is, but I'm pretty confident to say that on the margin, we have too much of it now.
Why should people be aware of what spatial economics is, and how it affects their daily lives?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say a lot of phenomena that people are interested in have an important spatial component. And so, like I said earlier, a lot of inequalities are in some way spatially driven. A lot of innovation and technological change has some spatial component. And something that people worry a lot about, for instance, is housing prices. That, of course, is a naturally spatial phenomena because houses exist in space. They're like canonically the most sort of spatially relevant good.
So, with that, would you say certain cities are winning and certain cities are losing in this battle, or it's pretty like fluctuates generally?
What battle are you referring to?
In the sense of like there are some cities that are handling this problem better than others with housing and other ways to keep everything at bay.
Yeah, surely that's true. I mean, of course, there is variance in like the quality of policymaking and building across space. I think it is Minneapolis now is quite famous for having relaxed some of their zoning restrictions, and that appears to have been beneficial. But I'm not an expert on that, so I won't talk about it too much. But in some ways, high housing prices are a symptom of something else that we think is good, which is technological change making places richer. Right. So why is it so expensive to get an apartment in New York or San Francisco? Well, because these are very productive places. Right? If nobody wanted to live here, if nobody was making high wages in these places, they wouldn't be able to charge high rents. They have high rents because they're productive. The problem, though, is that because of these building restrictions, the housing stock cannot keep up with the demand for housing driven by the productivity of their industries that employ people there. And so this actually reduces our ability to allocate more people towards those productive cities and places, which is a problem.
So, by that logic, would you say that those cities are not facing so much a job problem as they are facing a housing problem?
Yeah, yes, I think that's a reasonable way to characterize it. We want to send more people to those cities. They have high wages, which means that if you go there and work, you're contributing more to society. That's what a wage is. It's telling you sort of how productive your work is to society. But we can't get as many people there because we don't have enough places to house them. And the result of that is rising rents.
So, with that said, obviously those are pretty dense urban areas. You can only build so much there. Would you say they need to improve their housing restrictions or maybe improve the accessibility to the city from, let's say, so what's somewhat suburban area?
Yeah, I don't think I have enough sort of ground level expertise to say that. I think in general, probably doing both would be beneficial. I mean, we could increase housing density. Certainly in San Francisco, we could increase housing density. I know there's a lot of policy discussion around increasing housing density, specifically around rail stops, so that people can like live near subway stations. But to what degree each of those things matter in a particular city?
Uh, Not to keep harping on this, but so
Yeah.
would you say then small towns are somewhat dying out then because of how much these bigger cities take more wages and take more jobs away from them?
Well, so I think you're using negative sum language that I
Okay.
don't think is helpful. So it's not that the big cities are taking away jobs or taking away wages, but it's that technology has changed such that being and working in a city means that your labor is more productive. And so, all else equal, we would want people to reallocate from small towns towards cities, conditional on their preferences. I mean, different people want to live in small towns and want to live in cities, and that matters. But sort of all else equal, as a differential in wage is open up, not because anyone's stealing anything from anyone, we should want more people to move.
How much has COVID impacted this since working from home became more regular and um excuse me, certain cities are seeing different booms in certain cities? Is COVID still impacting this economy or is it more so dying, settling out?
So I think COVID is important, but I would guess that it's less important than people were thought it was going to be. I think that there was this moment during COVID when we were all working from home and we all sort of thought like, is this the new normal? Is this just what life's going to be like from now on? And in many cases that turned out not to be true. Now, we ended up in this sort of intermediate space. Like I'm literally at my house right now. And I work hybrid. My wife works remote. So like it has definitely impacted things, but it turns out being close to other people matters a lot for your productivity. And we kind of already knew this because, like, telecommunication technology has been rapidly improving for a long time now, and still cities matter. That's kind of counterintuitive. Like, maybe you would have thought as transportation and communication technology got better that we would have been able to spread out, but actually, we're like agglomerating more now than we did, 100 years ago when telecommunications technology was worse. So that already kind of suggests that proximity matters even in an advanced technological economy that has good telecommunications technology. And it turns out that's still pretty true with Zoom. Now, maybe if we get like really good virtual reality, things will change, but Zoom still kind of sucks for a lot of things that people would like to do.
I agree with that. As far as infrastructure goes, is there a city you see that's improving their infrastructure better than others, or do you think that America as a whole needs to improve its infrastructure?
Yeah, I could not tell you sort of city by city who's doing well on infrastructure. Um, I wouldn't, I'm not sure I can make an ordinal claim about which types of infrastructure are best, but I know one thing we do need to be building more of is transmission lines, as I was saying earlier. So, for two reasons. One is like the sort of new industry that will be important in the future, even if you think we're over investing in it now. It's going to be important, just AI. Maybe it won't be as important as the sort of people proselytizing think it will be, but it's certainly going to be important, and it's quite electricity hungry. And if solar panels keep getting cheaper as they've been doing, that's going to be the cheapest way to feed the AIs, as well as everything else, energy. And so we're going to need to just move more electrons across space. And so building transmission lines, I think, should be a huge priority. Not to say that building other things shouldn't be a priority, but that's something I differentially know.
Just so everyone knows, how are AI and the transition lines correlated?
Oh, because so AI is a very energy expensive production technology. So AI is really sort of, in a way, like transforming electricity into cognitive work, right? And actually, like, much more energy expensive than human brains. Like, ChatGPT uses way more energy than I use in my brain, like in terms of chemical energy. It just uses like electrical energy. Um, and so the more we run LLMs, the more we train them, the more we put queries in them, we're going to need more electricity. And there's a wide range of projections over how much more electricity. And so I don't know who's right in that story, but they all point in the same direction. And so we're going to need more electrons one way or the other.
If you had to pick one to help power AI, would solar or wind be more effective for it?
I would guess solar just because we've seen so much improvement in the price of solar, and there really doesn't seem to be any evidence yet of it slowing down. It does seem like that's a energy technology to be very optimistic about, though there are problems with intermittency that also need to be dealt with.
Okay. Is there any policy around that that you think would improve the welfare or the social welfare of America as a whole
Around what?
around AI and the building those and I'm sorry, what would you call them? I already forgot.
Transmission lines.
Transmission lines, yeah.
Yeah, so um, building transmission lines is mostly a infrastructure spending slash building regulation problem. As we've already discussed, it's just too hard to build things in the United States, and so we need to get better at this. Um, of course, I'll give an easy answer. We should have a price on carbon. This is sort of Econ 101, in that energy has, in its current form, has a substantial negative externality. So we're essentially subsidizing fossil fuels. We should stop doing this, especially if we're going to be raising the demand for energy with AI. But we should have a price on carbon whether or not we have AI. But if you increase the demand for energy because of AI, it's going to matter more whether or not energy prices are distorted. And they're very distorted now because we don't price pollution properly.
Do you think that's because we are hell-bent on only using fossil fuels, or do you think that's more of a policy standpoint from the federal government as a whole of like we're not going to deal with this until it's absolutely necessary?
The question is why we don't have a carbon price?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is voter myopia, really. Um, we were going to, like, there was a bill for a carbon price, I think in 2012, that got shut down. Um, and I mean, it's very simple. People just don't like when things get more expensive and would prefer to put the costs on other people, namely future people. And so that's what they do. But that's not necessarily the right thing to do.
Very true. So just on an economic standpoint, do you see the U.S. economy heading in a specific direction? And if so, why?
So I think there are many things to be optimistic about in the US economy. AI is a thing to be optimistic about. Now, people argue a great deal about whether or not we're in an AI bubble, and I just frankly don't know. But one way or the other, like, this is a very useful technology, and it's going to create economic growth. I mean, I code quite a bit in my job, and that sentence wasn't even quite correct because in my job, I need to produce a lot of code. I'm now more of a manager of like LLM coders than I am a coder. And that has cut down the amount of time that I have to spend on coding so much. And so if we can have some sort of productivity gain of an even somewhat similar sort for the rest of the economy, LLMs could be very important. And it's just going to take time for us to get better at using them. And so that's a reason for optimism. Reasons for pessimism is I think the US political system is becoming more unstable. There are some pretty serious tail risks there. And the US's fiscal position is completely unsustainable. If we stay on our current trajectory, we're heading towards a fiscal crisis, and that will be very painful. So there are some political things to be sorted out, but a lot of the fundamentals are moving in the right direction.
Okay. With that said, is there anything, if you were put in charge to change, that you would change, like that needs to be changed off the bat, like right away?
Yeah, I mean, I would put in place a carbon price. That's an easy one. The US government either needs to cut spending or raise revenue. In general, raising revenue involves distortions, right? Because you have to tax goods and services. That causes a distortion in the economy, which lowers economic output. So there's this trade off normally between the government raising revenue and economic efficiency. The nice thing about taxing something like pollution or a negative externality is that it actually raises efficiency by closing a distortion and raises revenue. So let's do that, right? Like, let's get the revenue while also increasing efficiency in the economy. And there's quite a few things that we could be doing something like that for. So my second favorite, less well-known thing that I would like to see us start taxing is antibiotic use in agriculture. So we use a huge amount of antibiotics. We use I think more than 2/3 of total antibiotics in agriculture. And that is a negative externality because we're causing the evolution of antibiotic resistant bacteria. So we should be taxing it for that reason, which again gets the government revenue while improving efficiency. But antibiotics in agriculture are also a cruelty enabling technology. We're able to treat, for example, chickens very poorly because we give them prophylactic antibiotics and then stuff thousands of them in a shed, and they don't get sick because we were giving them so much antibiotics, and they would have got sick had we not. And so I think you could both reduce the cruelty of factory farming and reduce the likelihood of antibiotic resistance and raise revenue by taxing antibiotics. So that seems like nice low-hanging fruit that we could be picking.
So just out of curiosity about circling back to spatial economics,
Right.
there's theories that, let's say hypothetically, a football team wants to build a stadium in a city, let's say in Charlotte, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their argument is that we're bringing all these jobs to the city, we're going to bring all this revenue to the city, but they always want to, let's say, not pay taxes for the first 10 years and things like that. Is there any data or any sort of proof that that actually is an even trade-off? Or is it more so a way of rich people trying to bully their way into getting taxes, not having to pay taxes?
Yeah, that's almost certainly a terrible idea.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, you won't find really many serious economists who think that's a good idea. You would need a sports team to be some sort of public good for that to be true. And it's not. Like, it's a private good. Sports are produced for people's entertainment, which is nice, but then the people enjoying the entertainment should be paying for it. It's not like infrastructure or a road or a school or something.
Which is much more important to society in general.
It's less about importance. It's more about whether or not it's a public good. So a public good is something that's non-rival. It means that if you benefit from it, that doesn't reduce my ability to benefit from it.
Okay, and so you think governments should be more focused on public goods?
Yes, absolutely. Government should be more focused on public goods. Sports stadiums aren't really clearly a public good in any way, any more than like bowling alleys are, or restaurants, or like any other sort of entertainment thing. Like, it's not clear why there's anything special about a sports stadium. What is special about it and why this happens is it's a coordination problem. So, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to ask, when you mean coordination, you mean between the city and the industry, or the team in general?
Across cities.
Okay.
So we saw this too with Amazon's newest location. I think they ended up outside of New York.
Yes, they were planning on actually entering New York City, and then I believe the city council voted against them entering because they wanted to avoid, I think, paying taxes for the first 5 to 10 years of being there, something around that.
Okay, I'm forgetting then where exactly they ended up, but that's not actually the point. The point is that the Amazon or a sports team can say, I'll come to your city if you give me a tax break. And you want to be the city that gets them to come. But then it becomes a race to the bottom, where everyone is offering the sports team or Amazon tax breaks, and we're all worse off as a result. So what should happen is the federal government should essentially ban this. Is they should stop sort of tax competition across locations, because we'd all be better off if we all could, as a group, say no to Amazon or the sports teams and say, no, you build where it's most profitable for you and then pay your taxes. But one city would always like to deviate, give them a tiny tax reduction, and have Amazon there. But then because we're all trying to do this, it ends up being a tragedy of the commons.
Just to continue with that, so let's say hypothetically a city does get them to come in, and they do give them that break. The after effect of them building there and all those jobs they create hypothetically, and attraction they bring to the city, is that all theory, or is there a way to back that by data?
Well, you could measure this. It would be hard to get a causal estimate. So if a sports team or any business decides to locate in a city, and then you see after the fact that some outcome in the city improves, you might be tempted to say, oh, it's because the sports team, let's say, moved there. But maybe the sports team was moving there because it was a city that was already improving, and so that's where it would be most lucrative to build a stadium. So you'd need some sort of like natural experiment which says they were like really close between two cities and it was a coin toss whether they went to city A or city B. Maybe some paper has done this, I don't know, but you would need something like that. You'd need some sort of natural experiment.
And you mentioned how you're big for government investing in the cities, like as in transport and things like that. What are some things you'd like to see our government investing in? I know our railways have not been retouched in almost 60, 70 years. Is that something we need to improve on, or are there bigger issues that are lying out?
Yeah, I would struggle to give you an exact ordering of infrastructure spending as to which ones are the most important and what their relative returns are. It does seem like rail is a case where things would be improved. Specifically high-speed rail, it's kind of embarrassing that the US doesn't have any high-speed rail, and while there are certainly large parts of the country that wouldn't benefit from it, there are corridors that would. And it's kind of not clear. Well, it is clear why we're not doing this. It's because air travel is too cheap. So this gets back to the price of pollution. You can go from Austin to Dallas on an airplane pretty cheaply, but that's not the real price of flying because you're emitting so much carbon. If we properly priced carbon and so made it more expensive to fly between Austin and Dallas, there'd be more demand for a rail link between the two, which would then justify the rail link.
And just to follow up, so to my understanding, rail carbon emission is much less than air traffic carbon emission.
Yes, much less. Like the most carbon intensive activity an individual can do is fly. It's very energy expensive. I almost feel bad saying this. You'll feel bad about yourself if you take a few flights and actually count up how much carbon you're polluting relative to the rest of your life. It's kind of awful, but yes.
So, do our current climate and green energy policies reduce inequality between regions, like creating a class of carbon winners and carbon losers?
I think the current policy regime was designed to avoid this, actually. So, like the Inflation Reduction Act explicitly had subsidies going towards states that were going to lose from decarbonization to a degree that I think is actually excessive. Now, in terms of spatial inequality around climate, if we really properly decarbonized, if we got really aggressive about it and put a high price on carbon, yeah, there would be regional winners and losers. That seems very hard to avoid. The question of exactly how much is open. Perhaps the employment losses of fossil fuels might be highly concentrated. And I think the employment gains from renewables would be less concentrated. So my best guess, just on that intuition, is that there would be spatial inequality as a result. But that would be in the short term. In the long term, if we let climate change rip too much, there's going to be much, much larger spatial inequalities generated as a result. And so I don't put a lot of weight on the short term there.
That said, do you think there's any misconception about how a spatial economy works? Like, as in, higher wages mean more people leaving a city, or more jobs equal more people coming into a city? Or is there something specific that stands out to you?
So what were the two claims you just made? I think those might have been wrong.
So, as in, if there's bigger cities means higher minimum wage, and if there's smaller cities, there's a lower wage, or bigger cities attract more people, whereas smaller cities don't attract as much? Or is there something more nuanced that we're all missing?
Right, no. So this is an important part of spatial economics, which is the competition of congestion forces and agglomeration forces. So agglomeration forces bring people together. This says that when you're in a big city, when you're around a bunch of people, you become more productive, right? Because you're sort of, meeting other people in coffee shops and discussing ideas. Like throughout history, urban areas have been big generators of ideas. And we think that this is in part because of the seamless communication that people have in cities. They're able to transmit ideas very quickly. And we think that this makes more people more productive. There are rigorous estimates of this, and it does show that people's wages are higher in higher density locations. But against this are congestion forces, which I think we all have a very intuitive understanding of, right? When there's more people, it takes longer to get to work because the roads are more filled. And so there's this horse race between these two forces, which is determining city size. So, why are cities the size that they are? It's the interplay between these forces of congestion and agglomeration. If there was no congestion, we'd all live in New York. I mean, that's not literally true, but there'd be more people in New York if congestion was weaker and agglomeration was stronger.
Do you think that those big cities, New York, San Francisco, are doing a good job in leveling that out, or do you think that they need to revamp their policies?
I think that they need to improve on their building policies primarily,
As in making it easier to build homes.
making it easier to build homes. So, like, for instance, something California did recently, which was a good idea, is replace single family zoning or relax single family zoning. So it says they previously had it to where there are locations where if they're zoned single family, you can only build houses, like a house that one family lives in. And this was relaxed, I think, to the level of duplexes, where you can now build like side by side houses with two families in them, which is more dense. And you could go further. You could relax it to like townhouses and apartments. And I think single family zoning is mostly just a bad idea.
But besides zoning, because obviously that might be the biggest factor in getting more homes and more people, how how much are we underestimating the economics behind getting a builder to actually go there and build and making it easier for them to build the homes there?
Right. Well, getting a builder to build should be part of the true cost of building. The concern is not that building is expensive per se. The concern is that the private cost that people bear of building is distorted upwards. So if it is just hard to get people to come out to a construction site and work in the sun, and it is just expensive to get wood and metal and so on out there with them, then housing should be expensive because it's hard to make. It just is expensive to society. That's part of the true cost of housing. But if it's expensive because you have to pay your lawyer to go and talk to a bunch of bureaucrats for 3 months before you can even bring someone out to build anything, that's an artificial reason why it would be expensive. And so we don't want that. Notwithstanding the fact like it shouldn't be completely laissez-faire, but notwithstanding some need for regulation. But
So do you see other cities building more efficiently than other ones?
there are some cases where some cities are doing better than others, but this is a surprisingly widespread problem. Almost everywhere in the rich world has very expensive housing that's very hard to build.
Okay, so I don't mean to cut you off. So just as a
Yeah, yeah.
clarification, you think that overall in the whole of the US, this is a situation not just like in San Francisco and New York and more urban cities.
Yeah, I mean, it's more binding in cities that are more productive, like San Francisco and New York. But to a degree that's actually quite surprising, this is a worldwide problem. It's very expensive in London. It's very expensive in Melbourne. It's very expensive in Toronto. So there is just something about housing where it naturally moves towards this equilibrium where it's more expensive than it should be. And I think that there are some like good reasons for why this would be universal. So the people who benefit from housing remaining expensive are the incumbents, and it's easier for them to organize. The people who would benefit from cheaper rents are dispersed everywhere, and so it's harder for them to organize.
That's a very good point. Um, just quick thought.
Yeah.
So do you think Trump's proposal for a 50-year mortgage will help people get more access to housing, or is that just very ludicrous and will not work at all?
It's not clear why it should change anything. I mean,
So I've read, I mean, of course it's not like conclusive that the
right.
theory is that since the 50-year mortgage will lower people's monthly mortgage payment, it'll give them more access to becoming homeowners instead of renters.
Yes. So, I mean, the reason people take on mortgages at all, myself included, is because they don't have the cash, right? And so they're trying to spread it out over more time. So But mortgages, you get charged a risk premium. Like the bank is charging you more than you're charging them. Like my savings account has a lower interest rate than my mortgage. And so it's, if you had the cash, you shouldn't generally have the mortgage because you're being charged a risk premium. And so I would guess that that might make a 50-year mortgage worse. And so, yeah, it would offset. People are spreading it over more time, which is a problem insofar as they're illiquid, but they might be paying more overall as a result. So it's not really clear if it's beneficial. And I think plausibly, just given the power of compounding, my bet would be that it's not beneficial. 30 years is already a pretty long time.
Yeah. Uh, if you were put in charge today, in charge of the US's housing issue, how would you fix it, or what would be the first thing you think that needs to be addressed?
I would mainly try to go after these zoning restrictions. You want to make it such that individual cities don't have so much control to restrict building in their own locations. And so I would be tempted to get rid of single family zoning altogether. I would talk to an expert and say, is there some unintended consequence of this that I'm not thinking of? Because I don't really understand why we would have single family zoning at all. Maybe someone can explain this to me, but on the margin, it should certainly be relaxed. We should have less of it, no doubt.
And just another quick thought, sorry. Incentives, do you believe in giving builders more incentives to build more, or do you think that's just not going to help them in any way of getting where they need to get to?
The market should already be providing the
Okay.
incentive. The problem is the gap between what the builders are being paid and what the buyers are paying. That's the concern. And so I don't think you'd want to just sort of throw subsidies on that. What you'd want is to close the gap by paying lawyers less in the middle to go talk to the regulators. I mean, I'm picking on lawyers, but just all of the costs that comes with complying with the regulations.
Okay. Excuse me. So if a builder wants to build in a single family, I know I'm kind of harping on this because it's kind of not registering in my. So if a builder wants to build a duplex in a single family, you're saying that it would be more beneficial to the builder and to the city as a whole that they're allowed to build duplexes instead of singles because it provides more apartments overall in general, right?
Yeah, yes. If the market is calling for townhouses and duplexes and apartments in places that are currently zoned as single family zoning, it's not clear why the people who happen to live there now should be able to veto that. We have this very strange, it's kind of a moral norm where it's like if you live in a location now, you're like in charge of what gets built there. And like again, I don't know if we want to totally get rid of that, but we certainly have way more of it than we should. Like what is so special about someone happening to live in a location right this second relative to like the spatial allocation of housing?
Just as in a closing, is there anything you'd like the general public to know about spatial economics and about how it works, or is there some sort of message you'd want them all to hear in general about it?
I think in general, people have too much negative sum intuition. So people tend to think, sort of even unknowingly, that if someone benefits, it must be that someone else lost. But in general, that is not how the world works. That's how some things work. But that's not really how the world works in general. I mean, it wouldn't, if that were how the world works in general, how are we so rich now? Where did all this stuff come from? We had to have built it. And just as, I don't have hair because I stole it off of some poor person who lost their hair, Having some cities doing better doesn't necessarily imply that others are doing worse.
One last closing question. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. If you were to jumpstart the economy today, what would be the first thing you would do?
Well, I think I object to the premise of the economy needing to be jump started. Like,
Okay,
the,
if you were then, I guess, to preserve the state it's in right now so it doesn't decline as quickly or as at all, what would you do?
well, okay, so I was giving you a hard time there, but we're not in a recession, right? So we don't necessarily need stimulus. What I would like to see us do is become more forward looking. So, in general, the US and I think even the global economy is biased against future people. So, due to climate change, due to our fiscal decisions, we're lumping a lot of costs on future people. Like the United States is now running a huge deficit, primarily to send transfers to elderly people so that they can consume more. Um, that seems pretty indefensible to make all future people have to pay for this sort of party that we're having now. Um, we should stop this because I think it's very hard to defend lumping so many costs on future people in the form of the government borrowing, in the form of putting more carbon in the atmosphere. And then the original thing I was going to say to your question is not investing more in innovation. Innovation is the ultimate thing that we should care about. And the government has a history of investing in some extraordinarily high return innovations. So the internet came from DARPA. mRNA vaccines were in large part funded by the government. There are these massive, massive gains we can get from innovation that is in large part government funded. And so maybe I'm cherry picking ex post and just picking the technologies that paid off. And of course, the government is going to invest in technologies that aren't going to pay off, but that's part of what the government should do. It should bear the risk of innovation and put far more resources into things like basic research so that future people can be much richer than we are today. Um, and I think we're moving in the opposite direction, which seems like a terrible idea.
Thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the podcast. Everyone, this was Professor Eric Donald at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you.
All right, great.